it was 50 years ago this week that Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, gave a speech to a Republican organization in Des Moines. The gist? That television news was out of step with what most Americans think. It was a turning point for conservatives and pointed us to where we are today. November 1969. All three broadcast networks carried Spiro Agnew's speech about television news live, and he was none too kind to the men who ran the industry.
The views of a majority of this fraternity do not, and I repeat, not represent the views of America.
Saying the power of television cannot be compared to the print press, Agnew claimed the networks were censoring a conservative point of view.
Now, a virtual monopoly of a whole medium of communication is not something that Democratic people should blithely ignore.
Richard Nixon credited Spiro Agnew with emboldening his own criticism of the press.
There's not a good one on the whole goddamn free network, not one.
Now, 50 years later, there are comparisons of the Nixon era to the Trump presidency.
Where was that story, in the New York Times? Well, the New York Times is fake news.
Who and what news source to believe has amped up recently? None more obvious than coverage of this week's impeachment hearings. While the more middle-of-the-road CNN is getting middle-of-the-road Nielsen ratings, the two most opinionated cable channels had the best. Fox News daytime coverage and Sean Hannity saw huge numbers.
It is yet another fraudulent hoax, conspiracy theory. It is another witch hunt.
MSNBC daytime came in second, with Rachel Maddow busting nighttime numbers.
It's illegal and impeachable, and he's going to get impeached for it.
As for history repeating itself, don't hold your breath for Trump leaving these final words for the media.
You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
I had never heard that speech from Spiro Agnew 50 years ago about television. I have to say, he was not entirely wrong. The networks were univision when it came to their approach to everything. It was a clutch of white guys at each of the three networks, and they controlled the entire content, basically the universe of what we all consumed. I mean, I probably wouldn't have agreed with him back then, but I certainly understand it now. There were no other voices. And when you look at it in the context of today, I mean, that really didn't make a huge inroad. I think it empowered people. It was the silent majority, if you'll remember that term. It certainly empowered people to think differently and sort of away from what the network, the digest of the network daily news. But it didn't change things the way we've seen things change today.
By the way, that speech was written by William Safire, who later went on to become a columnist for the New York Times. You know, the problem today is that in the midst of all this, we have Fox News. And rather than being a responsible conservative voice, it's spouting discredited conspiracy theories in prime time about the impeachment hearings. And you see that the Republicans on the committee are essentially trying to produce sound bites that will be heard that night on Fox News. I've thought for years that if Fox News had been around during Nixon, he never would have had to leave office. And I think we're seeing it play out today.
The thing that jumped out at me is when you look back at that time, you had Walter Cronkite, who was the most trusted man in America. But what we forget is that while we think of the solid journalism that took place at the time, he was also giving a lot of opinion and talking about the way that he wanted things to play out, specifically the Vietnam War, right?
Once he did it.
Right. But still, he did provide opinion, and which a lot of them did at the time. And you don't see anything like that now, at least not in your main shows. You have your primetime shows, which are all about opinion. Now, that gets lost, I think, on the general public, and you see that pushback. The other thing, too, is that when you look at how conservatives at that time felt about the media, there was a lot of distrust. The same kind of climate that you see now, and we sit back and say, wow, this is unusual, but that same feeling, beyond just Agnew, the community in general, conservatives, they felt the same way.
When you think of where we have now, where we have reporters being caged off when they're going to cover rallies, it's just, we've accelerated this to a point that is, I think, very, very scary for the way we're trying to understand truth and fact at this period of time.
Oh, I would totally agree. I want to just make one comment. The people at the top are not so different from who was at the top then, with rare exception. There are other voices a little bit down further from the top, but at the top, the decision makers are as, at the time, Agnew described, just as they were. I think what's, really sad is that people would like to go to a place where they could find or feel that they could find solid representation of a spectrum of perspectives. There's one truth, there's many perspectives. They'd like to hear the solid and not feel as though the other side is somehow lying about it. Do you know what I mean? And it's gotten to the point now where you can't put that out there because people say, no, you're lying, that's not what happened. And I don't know how you get out of that. I don't know. And I'm not sure if what he said led to it, because we seem to have devolved to some space I can't understand, honestly.
And do you think people really want that? Well, you say they want to go to a place where they can get something solid and truth and so forth. I think people say they want that, but ultimately they feel comfortable watching what sounds very much
niche viewing.
Yeah, but that's because we made it that way. And I don't think that would happen if people get Jennifer, you do investigative reporting, and so that people always say, we don't want to hear about this, the media. But then when those reports come out, they're very interested.
Well, exactly. When you're working with documents and data and fact-based reporting, I mean, it's hard not to provide some type of truth. And so that's why this is so frustrating when we're dealing with people not telling the
And my
truth.
point is that people respond to those reports. So they do want it.
Well, there's also much less polarization at the local and regional level than there is at the national level.
That's true,
so
too.
that is a help to the kind of work you do, Jennifer.